Hi, and welcome to this video on the HACR Corporate Inclusion Index, Frequently Asked Questions. We'll be going through questions from each of our four pillars, so employment, procurement, philanthropy, and governance. The first pillar, employment, one of our frequently asked questions is, what is a corporate employee? And this is a term that is different from other terms within the CII. Because we don't provide a definition for it. Most of the other terms which are specialized, we do provide a definition for, but corporate employee is not one of them. And this is done on purpose. We don't provide a definition for corporate employee because many organizations and companies define corporate employee in very different ways. And we don't want to box in our participants by providing them a definition that doesn't apply to them. So instead, we tell our participants to look for things that do and do not apply to the kind of employee that we're looking for. And in that same vein, we're not necessarily interested in determining the difference between hourly versus salary, part-time versus full-time, unionized and non-unionized. These are, and some of the other distinctions that are here at the bottom of the screen, these are not the kind of things that we're looking for in determining whether an employee is corporate or not. Many companies would include many, if not all of these types of employees as corporate employees, while some may exclude some of these criteria. What we're really looking for is these three things, that the employee that you're looking at is US based, that they have a direct pipeline to leadership position, primarily the C-suite, within the organizational structure, and that their day-to-day activities and decisions have an effect on corporate operations. So say if your company makes a widget, it's not necessarily those who are on the line within the factory making the widget that we are necessarily looking for, but those who decide how the widget is made, how many widgets are made every day, how the widgets are transported and sold without externally from the company, but not necessarily, again, the salesman of the widgets, unless these employees, the line employee or the salesman or person, unless they have a direct line to the leadership, C-suite, they wouldn't be necessarily included. But there are many combinations and examples of how this could apply to who counts and who doesn't as a corporate employee within your company. Of course, any questions on this topic and any of the topics that we're discussing today, please feel free to reach out to us to discuss them further. The next question in employment is, what are Hispanic Serving Institutions, or HSIs? Hispanic Serving Institutions are higher education institutions which serve at least 25% of their student body are Hispanic. There are places where you can find lists of HSIs online. Our two recommended websites are the website for one of our coalition members, the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, and the White House Hispanic Prosperity Initiative, which is a government initiative. On their site, you can find a list of HSIs that the government has created. So the next question in employment is, what is the difference between mentorship and sponsorship? And these are terms that we do define on our survey, and just taking some language right out of that definition, sponsorships are programs that are defined as those where individuals in positions of authority intentionally use their influence to help others advance, while mentorship programs generally pair employees with people who can provide advice and feedback. The main difference here to consider is that sponsors can leverage their position, authority, and network within an organization to help advance others. Whereas mentors can have that, but they don't necessarily have to. Sponsors, upon seeing a leadership position within the organization, have the ability to put forward diverse candidates to be considered for that position, whereas a mentor's role is mainly to provide advice on issues that an employee may be having within the organization, either because they have experience with those issues, or they can provide an insider or outsider perspective on how to solve that problem. Next, we have procurement. And in procurement, one of the often asked questions was, well, how can ERGs help with procurement opportunities? And it's a bit hard to answer this question without taking into account the evolution of ERGs, or at least the theory of evolution of ERGs. And that is that many ERGs start out as affinity resource groups. And that is a grouping of people who get together because they share common characteristics or interests with one another. And after some time, that ARG evolves into an employee resource group, or ERG. And ERGs are more focused on the development of their members into leaders within the organization. And over time, that then evolves into a BRG, or a business resource group. And that is a group of leaders within the organization that do share a common interest or characteristic, but also can serve as experts within their communities. And as experts, they can provide feedback and information to the organization that would help it get a footing within the community, or advance its goals. So, for example, if a company needed to had an opportunity to have some services fulfilled by a business, this is a new opportunity, new contract, and they would like to consider diverse businesses as part of those who they will be doing business with for this opportunity. They could approach the BRG and ask, well, as leaders within the community, as those who are often interacting with community members, how can we get this opportunity out to the right leaders within the community, with the businesses out in the community that you're a part of. The BRG might know directly businesses that could be good candidates for this opportunity, or they might know the right leaders within the community that would get the message out to get diverse candidates to be considered for the opportunity. And so those are some of the ways that ERGs, BRGs can help with procurement opportunities. Next, we have, well, how are companies tracking their spend, particularly their spend with diverse suppliers? Because almost every company, I mean, I've never come across a company that doesn't track spend generally, but spend with diverse suppliers is something that many companies are still working on how to do, on doing it. But one of the ways that companies that are doing it are tracking their spend is through direct reporting. So they directly ask the companies that they're doing business with, the companies that they have contracts with. They're directly asking, what does your leadership structure look like? What are your owners or owner? What do they identify as? And through those questions, they are able to determine where their spending is going. But there are different tiers which you can track for those contracts. I mean, the direct spend or tier one spend can be easily tracked. You ask the companies that you're doing direct business with whether they can report this information, and they often do. Now, tier two, those are the businesses that are doing business with your direct suppliers. Those are companies that your direct suppliers may or may not be tracking the diversity of those owners and leaders. And so companies do ask this question, and some do require tier two tracking. And the reason why this is important is because oftentimes, depending on the industry, there may not be many diverse suppliers that provide a product or service in certain industries, at least yet. And so the opportunity for diversity really is in the tier two. So the businesses are doing work with those suppliers to help meet the goals of the contract that you just signed with them. That's where the opportunity is. And so companies are looking at that as a way to determine how much money they're spending with diverse suppliers, indirectly at least. Another common question in procurement is, what is financial assistance? While financial assistance can certainly be um, direct money given to businesses you're doing contracts with, so in the form of grants or loans, they can also be other things. So, say there is a course or certificate that would help the business improve how it does a certain thing, that would also help it become a better partner with your company. If you were to pay for that course or certificate or provide a grant or a loan for that company to take or get this loan or course or certificate, that would count as financial assistance. Another example would be, if you normally have with your contractors quarterly payment terms, and you're willing to negotiate advance payment options for diverse suppliers, that also alleviates those suppliers' financial burden in the moment because they can receive that money in advance. You're not necessarily paying them more, giving them more money. You're just changing how and when they get that money, and that can also count as financial assistance to these organizations. Really, what we're looking for here is whether or not you're um, providing any activity or program or providing them with any financial assistance and that would alleviate financial burden, whether that is cutting down the time frame for when they get paid, or paying for something that they would normally have to pay out of pocket, or providing them with um, the resources to improve their business as well. Now we're in philanthropy. So one common question here is, what is the difference between Hispanic community and Hispanic-led organizations? Primarily, the difference between these two is who is leading the organization. Hispanic community organizations don't necessarily have to be led by Hispanics, though some of them can be. Um, our, our often go-to example is the United Way of Greater Miami. United Way is not a Hispanic-led organization, but the United Way of Greater Miami is in a community that has a large Hispanic population, and as such, it is an organization that uh, serves the Hispanic community. Now, Hispanic organizations like HACR, like the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, are Hispanic led. And there are many organizations across the country that are Hispanic led. But there are no official lists that I know of where you could find, what organizations across the country are Hispanic led. But there are resources out there that you can go to find lists of Hispanic serving organization or Hispanic led organizations rather. One is our very own website. So hacer.org, HACR.org. You can there you can find our coalition members, which are the organizations for whom the CEOs serve on our board. These organizations, these 14 organizations, are Hispanic-led organizations. Other sources can be Unidos US and LULAC, which are both member organizations. Their membership lists are comprised of primarily Hispanic-led organizations within the Hispanic community. Next, we are asked, how and why do we calculate the dollar value for volunteer hours? The how is pretty easy. What we do is we take the volunteer hours that you report to us every year, and we then go to independent sector, which calculates a average dollar value for the volunteer hours of any given year. And you would find that value by going to their website at www.independentsector.org. And we take that value and we multiply it times the hours that you reported. Um, once once we have that, so once we have that value, um, that tells us in any given year what the dollar contribution of your volunteer hours on average is within this community. And that's important to us because it's another sign, another example of the contribution and value that you are putting into our communities. And it's just another measure and of how through your philanthropic initiatives you can contribute to the health and improvement of the Hispanic community. Next in philanthropy, we have how are other companies tracking volunteer hours in the community? And there are three main ways that we have seen companies do this. The first is that they develop an internal tracking system to do this. So they've developed a system internally that allows them to track not only the volunteer hours and who's doing them, but at what communities and any number of other data points that they may find useful for their internal purposes. Another way is that companies hire a third-party vendor. So they'll go to a company externally that it specializes in tracking volunteer hours, and they will contract them to do this for them. A third way is a combination of these two things. So they will both track some data points internally and hire a third-party vendor to do some other tracking externally. Now we're on to governance. And here, one of the more common questions is, what is a proxy statement and where do we find it? A proxy statement is one that is required of a firm when soliciting shareholder votes. And this is filed as a form. The form is called the DEF 14A, and it's filed with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. It's usually filed just before a company's annual board meeting. And you can find each company's DEF 14A by going to the SEC's EDGAR database at sec.gov/EDGAR. But what if you don't file with the SEC? And there are a number of reasons why you might not file with the SEC. One is that you're not a publicly traded company. Another one is that you are a foreign company, you're not a US-based company. A third is that you are a quasi-governmental or a governmental organization. And if any of these apply to you, then you might not have any filings with the SEC. So there are some things that you can do in order to still answer this question, because really what we're getting at is whether or not you file any official statement with a government that speaks to your diversity inclusion practices. Oftentimes companies do that through the SEC here, and this document, the DEF 14A, is where we often, if not always, find a diversity statement. But if you don't, there are equivalent filings in other countries that may serve the same purpose, and those statements may be contained in those filings. If that is not the case, and you're still not sure as to whether or not there is a filing available for your company that would speak to their practices, feel free to contact us. We will discuss, what your filings are and what options you may have to answer this question. Next is what is dotted line reporting? And when we initially wrote this question and we decided to go with dotted line as a term that we would use to describe the relationship with the CEO we were trying to get at, we thought that dotted line was an informal term, that there wasn't really a formal definition for it. But we found out that we were wrong about that. But still, we keep the term here because there isn't one available currently that would succinctly describe what we're trying to get at. And that is that the person that is responsible for diversity and inclusion have the ability to go to the CEO directly without having to go to someone in between them to discuss critical diversity and inclusion issues. If that's the case for this person, then that for us would count as a dotted line relationship. What we're trying to get at with this question is access. Does the person have access to the CEO when they need to talk to them about diversity and inclusion issues? And then finally, we are often asked about class A, B, and C employees. I think that the main issue here is, and the reason why we're asked this sometimes, is that different companies may have different terms and words for these kinds of class of employees, but most companies, if not all, have the same structure. And what we mean by class A, B, and C is class A are the direct reports to the CEO. So those, not the CEO themselves, but those who report directly to the CEO. Class B are the reports of those reports. And then class C would be 2 levels below class A, those who report to class B. While different companies may call these classes differently, as I mentioned, we have found that most, if not all, have a similar structure for their leadership within an organization. And that is it. Of course, if you have any additional questions, or if there's something that we did not answer, or if you want further information on anything having to do with the CI, please feel free to reach out to us at research@hacer.org. And also, if you're interested in checking out any of our previous reports, the CII from last year, STEM report, the LES report, and others that we have created, please check out our website at hacer.org/hacer-research-institute for more information. Thank you.